edition of Simply Stated with Deborah K here on YouTube. Today's edition is going to be a special St. Patrick's Day edition. Got the little green tutu going. And this is Fachero St. Patrick's Day music. So we'll have that in the background for a little bit today. But this episode is a special episode. We're going to be talking about some really pertinent issues. I waited a really long time to make this episode and release some special research with it as well. So I hope you enjoy it. I've got my sparkly green sweater on, although it's a bit hot, so I'm probably going to take it off here if you don't mind. And sort of get comfy while we talk today, because this is going to be probably one of the better episodes that you've ever watched. I've got some really good news to put out, and by good news I mean saucy stuff. I don't necessarily mean it'll make you totally happy. So, I'm going to touch up my makeup just a little bit here. Get a little dot here. And up there. Okay. So I hope you all had a nice St. Patrick's Day weekend. I know up here in northern Michigan we had several events. There was a parade. I was out working yesterday at a local ski slope where there was a little slush race. Like, people have been seeming to really enjoy themselves. There was like a leprechaun lap around here. Today's episode is actually going to focus on some fairly interesting issues, and this one I'm really not going to try to belabor it too much. You know, St. Patrick's Day and all. Let's, I guess I should throw one of these in. It was somehow in my like package of shamrocks and dollars, right, for the holiday. I'm gonna turn the music up a little bit again. I do have to show you this really quickly. I've got my like little. Oh, here, just come with me. It's cute. I've got the little like St. Patrick's Day decor right here. Isn't that cute? So anyways, so let's get on with the show, right? So today's episode is actually going to be about someone that some of you may or may not follow actually in the U.S. news, and you're going to have to refer back to the topics I've covered in the past on gangs, terrorism, Endeavor Corporation, the Russian FSB activity in the U.S., the Chinese CCP, drug dealing, cults, all of that stuff. It'll be really hard to understand without it, because I'm not going to make like an hour-long episode and all that stuff. So if you're confused at all, you can always go back to the episodes from the Thought Project just so you know. And also please consider reviewing some of the episodes from Simply Stated in the past, because I said at some point that I would try to get this episode actually out and done. So what I'm going to talk about today is, in the past I referenced that there was a woman that had attacked me in Alexandria, Virginia. And it put an end to my healthcare career because of subsequent injuries from it. I ended up spraining my whole back. Like, she basically tried to kill me. Oh, and you know what? I think for this episode, we're especially going to have to do some tea, since it is St. Patrick's Day, and take bags out, because let's be honest, St. Patrick's Day was essentially a day about St. Patrick originally driving all the snakes out of Ireland in Catholic discussions and their practice of the Christian faith. But also it's so important to know that the holiday took on a stronger meaning over time about civil rights and civil rights around the world, and the abolition of slavery. So we're throwing this tea bag out. As you know, that's a reference to discussions at Luther College, and some of the members of the gangs there who are part of the Russian FSB had thought they could set the rest of us up to be trafficked and beat up on and raped for the rest of our lives. So you know, there's not going to be any sort of punches pulled in the show. Everything's going to be very, you know, in depth. But what I want to get into is that woman went by the name Diana, and she was famous for having held up real estate in the Arlington, Virginia area county, or the Pentagon, for 5 years, and committed other terrorist attacks. She also is someone who felt comfortable. Frankly, went ahead and killed a man on the DC Metro. So she actually went ahead and pushed him in front of a train. And ostensibly, there was a person from Team Z who knew about her behavior, and I've talked to Team Z about this, and we've agreed just not to discuss it anymore at all, who's still on their staff, I think. And he was around last summer with them in their travels here in northern Michigan, and he had egged her on to commit that kind of act. By the way, I just want to take a moment to let you know that I did make some really nice soda bread today, and that will be on my show as well. Oh, look at the cupcake. It has little green little green confetti on it for St. Patrick's Day as well. Okay, so as random as that sounded, I just had to do that for someone. And what I want to explain is that she was a hyper-aggressive person when I saw her again in 2020. I had forgotten who she was because I had had so much to deal with. And, you know, I went through the court cases, I'd gone through investigations of searching Wilhelm, I had to get protective orders, I'd survived a really nasty rape from the Russian FSB. You can see the steps the US government is taking now to expel the members of Tren de Agua. One of the people who actually had engaged in beating and raping me repeatedly is part of Tren de Agua, and he has not been expelled from the US. He was also Russian and Russian FSB, so it's important to remember that with some of these gang members that they're removing, and these governments to remove over the weekend, that they're actually from terrorist organizations, and sometimes Russian. It isn't just that they're from Venezuela specifically or some other country. So it's kind of, you know, keep that all in your head and make charts if you have to while I do these shows. But here's the thing, you know, I realized that she went by the name Diane. And I ended up going ahead and going to the Alexandria police and getting a protective order against her. Getting over my cold still. And she ended up actually, I got the order. And I moved out of Alexandria, I moved to Charlottesville. And even on my way moving out of Alexandria, before I left, like, she started fights in front of the cops started with me. She started fighting with me in front of a disabled person. Like, we managed to keep her away. But it was only because an actual off-duty cop was living in the residence at the time, because she was actually so crazy that she was living in the same apartment complex as me in Alexandria, Virginia. As one of my bosses put it, she didn't have the right to go through the pandemic and government shutdown at the time and then just flip the fuck out, which is what she did. She was actually running around on a Signet system and just being completely insane, taking instructions. And where we see some negligence here is there was a man by the name of Jose de la Riva who knew about her behavior before I moved out of the Eclipse. Eclipse Road had said she's really dangerous and she's following some kind of Signet system around even at night around the Pentagon and taking instructions and committing crimes, and no one was arresting her. And it had a lot to do with the Arlington cops, but what was he doing? Because he was supposed to be a top-ranking official at both DHS and then HHS. And he knew about the rape that was going to happen, and he did nothing to stop it either. So it's problematic that there were some officials who knew about her behavior over the years in the DC area who didn't bother to actually do their jobs correctly. And so I have to note that, and I hate having to do that because I try to get along with people. But the reality is that she attacked me because of the instructions she received from this Signet system that was put together by Booz Allen Hamilton for the Russian FSB, which had information from the man who had me raped and beat up in 2019 directly. It was a direct connection. So, you know, she made all the gang signs. She was involved in the attack on Capitol Hill. She claimed to be a Catholic and was not. She turned out to be a Cult of ISIS member. And she'd also had a history of being harassing and murdered people back in the late 2000s in Arlington, Virginia. She had lived up at Sheffield Court. I'm going to let the music die for a little bit to hear the rest of this. And she felt comfortable. She had actually come up and followed me around after the days after my breakup from my ex, we'll call David. He also goes by the name Chris. And we've already discussed who that is. I'm not going to go back into that again. But she was using the excuse that he may or may not have been a famous person to attack and bother me and stalk me. And I was being raped and attacked on a regular basis. I was dealing with a person posing as being a therapist in Arlington who wasn't. I was dealing with massive labor trafficking, and I was poor and scared. And I mean, of all this, I go back to the stories I gave you about how as women, sometimes you just have to get over your pain and get up. And that's how I was getting up and going over to Capitol Hill, and I was doing all these meetings. You know, I get up and got active. And frankly, it was because of somebody who had a relationship to CA that I did that. A law student, actually, at George Mason. So what I want you to understand is that this person, Diane, who went by the name Diane, was actively attacking and stalking people around Sheffield Court Complex. And there was a number of women who'd been murdered as well there and beat up. And unfortunately, the man that we've referred to in the show as Scott Zaczak, who I think may have actually been apprehended finally, was working with her. And he had also been somebody who worked out in Hollywood and had also supposedly gone by the name David Lynch, or either worked for David Lynch. I'm not going to go into all that today, but that's the point about him, is he was a Hollywood tech guy and, you know, a serial rapist and a stalker. So, The point is that connection was very clearly made. Apprehending her and putting her in prison long term was not. Now, here's what I need to tell you so you understand who that actually is. Because I have this lined up, and I know other people do too, and I don't know what's going to happen with her, and this may happen very quietly and behind the scenes. But she is actually a woman who also was at Luther College. She is the weird person that showed up at the end of my time there who was actually filming people. She was impersonating the head of the sorority. I had been in ABY, Emily, and she had tried to claim to be her at times and posed as a student and filmed people. And she admitted to that actually in the late 2000s. I had reported her, and the Arlington police failed to do anything about it because that's long-term stalking. Like, that's a decade later stalking, and then she shows up again in 2020. The Alexandria police obviously handled the situation a lot better, right? Like, they got me a protective order and protected me from her until I could move away. But the sheriff's office also said that I should just definitely consider moving out of the area because of how dangerous it had become. And it's important to understand that the sheriff of Alexandria at that point had actually been part of the California State Troopers at one point. So he'd actually been in some executive positions in California and understood the craziness with the Russian mafia and the gangs and the cartels, the terrorist groups, the bizarre cults around what's supposed to be the entertainment industry, drugs and all of it. So, Arlington County Sheriff actually had been fired during those years for being totally incompetent. He actually got fired in 2020. So what I want you to understand about this is that her actual name, as far as the industry goes, because TMZ said they were going to find this footage and put together, and they're like, you're going to be ready to do it, and we're going to know it, and everyone's going to know it. It's supposed to be like this great aha moment, and I have no idea if we'll go anywhere there except for like 5 of us who actually care about the issue. But I'm sure there's a lot of actual public health officials around the DC area who would like to know, and maybe even the families of, or friends of the person that she murdered in the DC Metro, because she went ahead and pushed a man right off the DC Metro, and it made the news, and she did it to make the news. You say at this point, was she a news producer? Yes. Her name is Susan Bass. She was the executive producer of the Wendy Williams show. And unfortunately, she's pretty clearly listed. I'm going to look it up right now again just to see if this was wrong, but I thought she'd been fired. Like, I thought after everything that went down in Arlington in the late 2000s that she would be fired. I didn't even totally recognize her when she showed up again in the late 2010s, that 2020 range. I didn't recognize her anymore. And I'm looking up news to see if she was fired from the show, and she wasn't, but, I mean, let's see, it says, where's Susan? How she misses her. Suzanne misses her. Interesting. And you remember what I told you at TMZ that they prefer to interview people, like they like dirt. So they like to interview people who are really dishonest. Like they did an interview with Fatina dressed up as a crazy like gangster type, and she was talking about how she was at Diddy parties and was being really gross and kind of stupid and just obfuscating the whole issue of P. Diddy's guilt in his white parties. And I've said he's a middleman, but the point is TMZ tends to interview a lot of people who are fairly sketchy because they want you to have like a visual of them, or at least some kind of profile of them, their behavior. I'm just looking at her years on the Wendy Williams show. I mean, it says 13 seasons from 2008 to 2022 before it was canceled. So here's the problem. Wendy Williams has had, what I understood in the back end during investigations when I was living in the Washington, D.C. area, was that she had a number of injuries and suspiciousness and didn't always have a good memory. Now, here's the thing about Susan Bass, is she actually attacked me from behind. She did this big setup where she was upset about something in the trash. She'd been acting like she had dementia. I was very much in my home health role. I also had a special pass to be out, just like the police, and also because I was also a Lyft driver. And I did, pandemic driving. I took, pregnant women to the hospital, took care of nurses, essential workers, and sick people. I drove a woman who was blind back and forth to get toilet paper from the store. And Suzanne just flipped out and attacked me. And one day, she claimed that she had something in the trash. She ended up attacking me and ended up causing me to sprain my entire back. It was the worst pain of my life. And unfortunately, it was very obviously something that was set up in those supposed 12-step groups where we're supposed to help people. Remember I said the 12-step groups where they abused my mom and got people killed and you don't really want to go if you actually need help? Yeah. Because that's where a lot of terrorists from the Russian FSB hang out. And frankly, the cartels have been hanging out. And they hang out to see if you'll come in there and say anything about what you're going through or what's happened, because they're just waiting to see, if you're going to be stupid enough They're talking about how you've been victimized by one of them there. You know, in the groups, technically, you're supposed to be able to talk about your issues and what's happened in your life and be fairly safe, but they're really not very safe places, because it was unfortunately due to those groups that I was attacked. A number of the people who attacked Capitol Hill were on in those groups. By the way, I saw a bunch of fake news that the president released a bunch of people from prison who were part of the Capitol Hill attacks, and that's just not true. Like, I haven't seen any of the actual violent offenders who had to go away because of those attacks actually. It's just simply not true. That's the point, is what I'm trying to say. I'm gonna grab that. And I just want you to understand all this, because she had been running her mouth a lot in the late 2000s and said that she was part of the FSB. She spent a huge amount of time going back and forth with Wilhelm, and was a part of a number of women that era being attacked and killed, plus the guy on the actual metro station platform. So, and it's important to know that she claimed to be upset about, you know, child molesters and care about the lives of children, and it was obviously fake, and she was spending a lot of time talking back and forth about how, you know, I was supposed to have a suit, but you know that that's just code for attacking people. And, you know, violent. Like, even before I moved out of the apartment in Alexandria, she came by and threw a really nasty, she found this really weird, like, dried fruit that was, like, this big, and threw it the window, like, really hard, like a rock. And, frankly, one of the men who had trafficked me said she worked for the Russian FSB, that they used her and had her attack and kill people. And this is supposed to be Wendy Williams' producer for, like, how many years? 2008 to 2020? Because I'm a big fan of Wendy Williams, but I have no doubt that she was on the way to ending up in the same position as my mother. Or, you know, she doesn't look as if she totally had a stroke and is now suffering from just studying her. She doesn't look like she has Lewy body stroke dementia, but she definitely has thyroid? Is it hyperthyroidism that she has? It's hyperthyroidism, right? And then she's got subsequent injuries. Well, that would be because of Suzanne. So if there's anything that needs to be considered, and by the way, we saw also the reports who actually care about Wendy at all, and her place in the industry as a truth teller. You know, let's consider the fact that this supposed assisted living facility got mad at her relative for taking her out to dinner, which is ridiculous. And I would have never gotten upset about it. Nobody else would either, unless there was some kind of obvious abuse. That they didn't prevent her from speaking with Susan Bassey. And they did prevent Susan Bassey from trying to reach her and filming her in her actual living environment, which puts her at risk. So Suzanne's clearly back out there trying to get people killed. And I think you need to take a serious look as far as the New York Police Department, anywhere else, and, you know, instead of like bad, and Wendy, it's like, where's Susan Bass? It's time to bring this person in. It's time to actually put her on trial for what she's done. Because I already took her to court in Alexandria. And I have no problem saying, you know, look, you can transpose, like, you know, Alexandria Police, people at DCA, people at the Department of Justice can testify that this is an alias. Or, you know, Susan Bass is the alias. The name is the alias. But this person is actually a man, and extremely dangerous and violent, and tried to pose as, in the past, she tried to pose as the head of my sorority at Luther College. And it was a sorority I left. I actually became an honorary Taldelt member at the end. And the woman she tried to pose as is actually, some people have said, is actually also the actress Allison Hannigan. And it just comes to a point where you think, you know, what was Susan Bass going to do next? Like, was she going to accuse Dana Perino or somebody of, like, being her and committing these acts? Because she had a history of violence at Luther College as well. Like, she was around with all the weird dumb JLo stuff. She was, you know, we had problems with, you know, Blogger Krishak, the whole thing. So she's got a long history of violent behavior and setting people up for failure and getting them injured, and I would seriously be considering having her put in a locked ward, not Wendy Williams. That's the reality. So this has been a very, very special, very, very fun episode of Simply Stated with Deborah. And that's really all I have to say about any of this. I'm going to leave the rest of my topics for another episode later this week. So happy St. Patrick's Day.